Namaste, good evening and morning wherever you're located. We welcome you all to the Bhagavad Gita meeting number 10. We will quickly go through the summary of the last meeting. Basically, we were just trying to understand the overall stages, the landscape, the roadmap of Bhakti Yoga leading to the higher stages. So, this meeting will be the concluding part on the topic of Bhakti Yoga. We, on a very high level, saw three initial stages, but we also saw the nine complete stages, which forms the roadmap of Bhakti Yoga as per Bhagavad Gita. Now, here we see in chapter 18, 67 shloka, it's a very important shloka, wherein we see that without bhakti, an aspirant is not qualified even to hear the teachings of Bhagavad Gita. The whole of Bhagavad Gita being a book of devotion, hence needs to be approached with devotion. So devotion becomes the basic qualification. And since all of you are so devoted and attend all the meetings regularly, hence we can share these teachings. Else, Lord Krishna says, this instruction should never be explained to those who are not assured or to those who are not devoted. It should also not be spoken to those who are averse to listening spiritual topics, and especially not to those who are envious of me. Then we have, we saw stage one. I'll not go through that. Stage two, again, we discussed this about soul hunger and how the aspirant starts working towards understanding the truth. And then we have stage three. We discussed about that constant brooding on the higher self. Now, regarding this, 12.8 talks about fixing the mind on Krishna, and once that is done, there is no doubt that hereafter you will dwell in me alone. And in this context, also, let's see 12.2, wherein it's said that those who remaining steadfast and imbued with supreme faith meditate on me. By fixing their minds on me, they are considered to be the most perfect yogis according to me. And in this particular shloka here, Lord Krishna is saying, make all the functions of the intellect to be concerned with higher self alone. The meaning is that you should constantly think of the higher self and eschewing other objects. What will follow from that? To this he answers, attaining knowledge hereafter, after the fall of this body. You will dwell in identity with the higher self, in the higher self alone, in the pure Brahman itself. There is no doubt. That is, you should not have any apprehension of some obstruction regarding the same. And here in this particular supreme faith, when it is mentioned, here we saw the importance of the word Shraddha. Shraddha, which literally means faith, can also mean trust. Faith in teachings of your guru or teacher. It also means surrender. So there are lots and lots of meaning of the word Shraddha or faith. But this is not blind faith. When supreme faith is mentioned here, it is not blind faith. It is a sattvic quality which needs to be developed in the devotee by knowledge. It is faith based on knowledge. Therefore, now we can see that when Shraddha is developed, and then when the aspirant loves Krishna, that is when spiritual will is activated, like we saw last time, and complete surrender to the higher is achieved, then and only then Krishna loves us. That is, the higher self loves us. So at that stage, our life is fully governed, guided, protected by Krishna, and we just follow his commands. This is again a very crucial and important turning point, like we had Vairagya as a turning point. And then we saw how karma yoga, jnana yoga needs to be performed based on bhakti yoga. And all three are connected. Now, we need to discuss a very important topic before we proceed ahead. And this is regarding chakras in the human body. Many new age teachings and even old age teachings or ancient teachings, various so called gurus nowadays provide various yogic plus breathing techniques and other techniques and methods for activation of the chakras. This is very dangerous and needs to be avoided completely. Else, it will have a very detrimental effect and push back one's progress on the spiritual path, sometimes by many lifetimes. If you have noticed the original teachings by HPB, WQJ, and Robert Crosby, they don't talk much about these topics. These yogic practices, which are taught nowadays, they raise the Kundalini Shakti in the spinal cord from the lowest center, which is known as the Muladhara chakra, upward to each astral level where the chakras exist, the centers of forces in the astral body. And then certain siddhis or powers are attained. These are the dangers of the lower iddhis, which is meant in the voice of silence. So the advice provided is never ever try to activate these chakras or try any of these practices. They will only provide great harm and no benefit in the long run. The reason being that these are all dealing with generation of lower iddhis. And as mentioned in the voice, there is a serpent coiled below every flower, which is plucked from the astral regions. The activations of chakras in this manner has nothing to do with spirituality. In fact, it leads to stagnation and involution. And we see millions of people nowadays are falling prey to the money making schemes of these false gurus. So let us completely avoid this. Here we see the location of the seven chakras. We have the three lower and the three higher centers, as you can see. So three lowers are these and three higher are these, and the seventh one, which is on top of the head here. As per the teachings of Bhagavad Gita, we don't need to do anything with the chakras. When we start living the higher life consciously, then as soon as we reach the apara stage of vairagya, the highest one, which we have uh, discussed, the para stage, in fact, uh, as we discussed in our previous diagrams, uh, the heart chakra in the disciple or the devotee gets activated automatically. He may or he may not be aware of it. And again, this is a very big turning point, and this also leads to generation of immense compassion. This is actually true practical Raja Yoga, wherein the centers in us are automatically getting activated by living the higher life and not by manipulating our breath or by performing any yogic practices. At the same time, we should never try to evaluate our progress while we are on this path, because then our motive becomes selfish again. And it also means that we still have attachment. We are not in reality performing the karma yoga, and we have not really developed the paramita of vairagya in us. Now, here, once the heart center gets activated, as we just discussed, when we reach the highest form of vairagya, and immense compassion is generated, then the devotee also develops immense love for the absolute with solidarity to the higher self in us. This stage is stage 4 of devotion. Then, when the love for the higher self or Krishna reaches higher and higher heights and levels, then the devotee completely forgets his own identity. And the personality is actually reduced to a cipher and is lost in the individuality. There is no association left with the personality. Even though the devotee is living in this world, he no longer associates himself with this illusionary body and illusionary world. or worldly activities. Being physically present in this world, he is no longer of this world. This is stage 5. Now, in this context, we have an interesting quote by Khalil Gibran, as he beautifully puts it. Love gives not but itself and takes not but itself. Love possesses not, nor would it be possessed. For love is sufficient unto love. This being so, the best of love is in the lover's attunement with the beloved. The attunement is successful to the degree the lover identifies himself with the beloved. So we need to attune ourselves consciously with our beloved, that is the higher self, Lord Krishna. Thus, identification is the measuring rod of love. When the identification is complete, love is fulfilled. Identification of the lower self with all its weaknesses, imperfections, and limitations, with the absolute reality, perfection, bliss, knowledge, is achieved through a constant remembrance of the nature of the higher self. When the finite ego or the lower self gets released from its false notions of limitations, it discovers itself to be nothing other than the supreme. And in this self discovery, it experiences complete identification with the self, the higher self. It realizes that it was always the supreme, but all through it was deluded. Then alone is love entirely fulfilled. This process is accomplished through a constant awareness of the divine in us, which can be maintained only if we maintain in ourselves an unbroken stream of divine thoughts. Now, in this context, there is a Sanskrit word known as anusandhana, in which it has and is used, which carries a rich tapestry of meanings depending on the context. At it at its core, it refers to immersion of mind and fusion with the inner resonance. And the inner resonance is also known as the sound, nada, where nada is the soundless sound or voice of silence, as mentioned by HPB in her book. So, true devotion lies in constant awareness of one's real nature, that is, again, by consciously taking the witness position, as we have severally discussed in the past. Now, here we see one shloka from Viveka Chudamani, number 47. It says, "It is indeed through contact with ignorance that you, who are the Supreme Self, experience yourself to be under the bondage of the not self. From this misunderstanding alone proceed the worlds of birth and deaths. All the effects of ignorance, root and branch, are burnt down by the blaze of knowledge, which arises from discrimination between these two, self and not self." Now, what causes us, the supreme self that we really are, to suffer these bondages? And what exactly is that which compels us thereafter to struggle again hard to regain our true divine glory through the delicate process of self rediscovery, is explained in this shloka from the book Viveka Chudamani. Just as we may mistake a wayside post or a pillar during dark night while we are walking on the footpath to be a ghost when there is ignorance about the post or the pillar, so too is the ignorance of the self in us that gives birth to the thought flow or the thought stream called by us the mind. The mind projects the sense organs at the level of the body and beyond. Then it gives us the apparent perception of the five great elements, which are also known as the Pancha Mahabhutas in Sanskrit, and the world of sense objects. The pure consciousness or life gets reflected in the pool of thoughts, and in our preoccupation with our mental life, we take ourselves to be this egocentric jiva, which is nothing but life conditioned by our own thoughts in a given pattern of time and place. So the sorrows of life, the limitations of the equipment, the imperfection of the world, the concepts of likes and dislikes, the pools of pleasures and pains, the shattering concepts of merit and sin, all these are affected by the ego. The ego ends up its own funeral fire lit by itself, which blazes into a conflagration of knowledge. So the fire arising from a constant discrimination between real and the unreal, the self and the not self, between the spirit and matter, is actually fanned into a blazing brilliance through steady vichara. Now, vichara is a Sanskrit word which means constant reflection, investigation, analysis, and reasoning. In this case, on higher self, by which all the effects of ignorance are burnt down. And when the ahamkara, the ego ends, we realize our real nature to be intrinsically divine, eternally free from pain and pleasure, absolute bliss. This is immortality while we are in this body. That is when the devotee understands all this as we discussed, and practically, actually, then and only then he enters into stage 6. And stage 6 is when the presence of higher self is felt in everyone, in everything, in every situation. And in this context, we have shlokas 13 and 14 from chapter 12 of Bhagavad Gita. The devotee in this stage is he who is not hateful towards any creature, who is extremely friendly and compassionate, who has no idea of mine and the idea of egoism, who is the same towards sorrow and happiness, who is ever forgiving, who is a sthita prajna, and who has a clear, firm conviction that he is not these sets of bodies and is but pure consciousness. Now, at this stage, not only the delusion of association of oneself with this particular body is shattered, but the devotee starts to feel and realize the one pure consciousness in all, in everything, and in every situation. This leads to high level of compassion, love, harmony in the heart of the devotee. This is the stage when, as per the Buddhist, a very high level of bodhi chitta starts to develop in the devotee. At this stage, the devotee has gone through first two of the three levels of self-realization, as we see, which is discrimination between the self and not self, subjective experience of the self within. However, the third one, getting established in the oneness of Brahman and the Atman, this comes at the later stage. Also, we need to note, as already mentioned, the heart center is by degrees activated by now, with the highest stage of Vairagya is developed. Regarding the same, it is mentioned that in the cave of the intellect is the heart, and in the heart, the Atman is apprehended. The idea of being in an atmosphere of love, when when an individual starts thinking regularly of the higher self, he will arrive at the experience of Atman. This self, which is in the cave of the heart, is something other than the subtle and the gross. It is a supreme Brahman and is non dual. So, he who enters this cave through meditation and comes to apprehend that he himself is the pure consciousness, to him, there is no re entry into the new body or a fresh body. So, the Upanishads describe the heart as a cave or inward cavity, which is also known as the Dhara Akasha. So small it seems infinitesimal, yet it holds the entire cosmic process in an unmanifest seed form. Drawing awareness into this cave dissolves the sense of separation, merging the individual with all existence. And point number two, this line comes from the Chandogya Upanishad, 8th chapter, one of the principal Upanishads in the Vedic corpus. It appears in the famous verse um, that invites the seeker to go into the cave of the heart and discover that all cosmic phenomena, sun, moon, stars, space, clouds, lightning, and rain, exist within the human heart also. So, this passage expresses the Upanishadic teaching that the individual self, the Atman, is not separate from cosmic self, the Brahman. By saying when it rains outside, it rains inside also. Here it shows the external nature and the inner, and it shows that the external nature and the inner consciousness actually mirror one another. Just as showers descend upon earth, so too the waves of emotions, purifications, spiritual insight, etc., arise within. The stellar regions shine resplendently within the heart to convey that the very radiance of the heavens, the stars, the all celestial lights reside intrinsically in our deepest being. Hence, by meditating inwardly, one discovers that the microcosm of the human heart contains actually the macrocosm of the universe. So, affirming the non dual unity of self and cosmos. Now, similarly, the third point, Katha Upanishad calls it the cave of the heart or heart lotus, Harit Padma, from which the wise leave behind joy and sorrow by realizing that primal pure consciousness dwells there. Now, the student devotee becomes the servant of the higher self, Dasya. And at this stage, the spiritual will is active by degrees. And the devotee or the lower self here becomes submissive to the higher. The dictates in this case or in this stage of the kama manas, the lower manas, are not entertained to a great degree, and the commands of the higher manas and buddhi manas are completely followed without any doubt. This leads to stage 8. Uh, so, Shakyata, complete oneness with the higher self. And at this stage, the personality has lost hold and merged or dissolved. And then we finally reach stage 9. At this stage, there is full manifestation of the spiritual will, and absolute truth prevails without any doubt. Here, Atma Nivedana means self surrender. And in elsewhere in other places like Vishnu Sahasranama, which is another scripture about Lord Vishnu and its various names, it is said that the heart of one who has taken refuge in Lord Krishna, the higher self, who is wholly devoted to him, gets entirely purified and he attains Brahman the eternal. The devotee offers everything to Lord Krishna, and in this case, Atma Nivedana means full surrender. So the devotee offers everything to higher self, including his body, mind, and soul. He keeps nothing for himself. He loses even his own self identity. He has no personal and independent existence. He has completely offered and surrendered himself to the higher self. He has completely become part and parcel of Lord Krishna. So he doesn't exist as such as a personality. And then we need to understand that here we see dhyana, Shraddha and Bhakti working together. So here we see that Shraddha and that is Bhakti encourage and increase dhyana, one's meditation or meditative poise. And these three together constitute the entire technique of working on the path as visualized by the great rishis and the sages of the ancient times. It is interesting to note here how each preceding factor strengthens and nourishes the succeeding factor. Shraddha or faith increases devotion, and in a man of faith and devotion, meditation is easily accomplished. Here we must clearly remember faith, Shraddha, in the same sense we have discussed earlier. That is, it is also connected with spiritual will. When thus we are truly aided by faith and devotion, we are able to meditate properly, and through meditation, we come to realize our true nature. Having experienced our true nature, our divine glory, we shall no longer associate ourselves or identify ourselves with this body or various sheaths. False identifications are created by ignorance of our spiritual glory. The body, mind, intellect are all superimpositions upon the glorious self, and yet we consider them to be real and permanent. These superimpositions are actually the real bondages upon us, and because of them, we feel the limitations of the mortal. So, he who abides in faith, Shraddha, devotion and bhakti, and meditation, dhyana, in his inner experience, comes to recognize this infinite nature of bliss and perfection, and thus gets released from the bondage of suffering and matter. And similarly, we see that Raj Yoga is based on karma yoga and bhakti yoga. So, Bhagavad Gita may be aptly called the book of devotion for the reason that it is the performance of karmas for the sake of adoring Ishvara with the fruits offered to him. And in Karma Yoga, it is the upasana, that is meditation on the formless absolute, as we have already seen in the previous meeting, the meditation on the formless absolute of the divine glory of Ishvara in Vibhuti Yoga, which is chapter 8, and of his universal form, which we will see in the later meetings in the Vishwarupa Upasana. So it is with the mind engrossed with Ishvara that uh, that, as mentioned in chapter 8, the Akshara Brahma Upasaka leave their body. So you are engrossed in Karma Yoga, you are engrossed in Bhakti Yoga, you have reached the zenith of Karma Yoga, you have reached the zenith of Bhakti Yoga. In parallel, you have reached the zenith of Raja Yoga, which is also known as Dhyana Yoga or Samadhi Yoga. That is when you have achieved the zenith of all these three yogas working together, the wise ones, when they leave their bodies, they reach the highest or higher spheres. And how this happens is mentioned in Secret Doctrine. It says, wherein it says that uh, volume 1, page 132, the Jiva soul goes with Sukshma Sharira from the heart of the body to the Brahmanandra in the crown of the head, traversing Shushumna, a nerve connecting the heart with the Brahmanandra. The Jiva breaks through the Brahmanandra and goes to the region of the sun, Surya Mandala, through the solar rays. Then it goes through a dark spot in the sun to the Parampada. The Jiva is directed on its way by the supreme wisdom acquired by yoga. The Jiva thus proceeds to the Paramapada by the aid of uh, Athivahikas, the bearers in transit, known by the names of Archi Ahas, Adityas, Prajapatis, etc. The Archis here mentioned are certain pure souls, etc. Now, various levels of meditation in Raj Yoga are also associated with various stages of Bhakti Yoga. So, here actually are the various stages of Samadhi, and this image is taken from the Yoga aphorisms of Patanjali, as mentioned by Taimni in his book, The Science of Yoga. This is very intense and detailed topic, which we can study some other time. But the idea is that various stages of Bhakti Yoga, which we are studying, work in tandem, in collaboration with the stages of Dhyana Yoga or Raja Yoga. And together with Karma Yoga, it forms a complete uh, uh, approach or a method or a roadmap for us to reach the highest goal of moksha or liberation, as provided by Bhagavad Gita. Also, in Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, it is mentioned Ishwa Paridhana. Ishwa Paridhana is same as Atma Nivedana, surrender to the higher self. And it is mentioned as the one of the five niyamas or the processes or principles. And in this case, the student or the devotee immediately follows it with the promise that by this surrender, um, samadhi is attained, as mentioned in the 23rd shloka or sutra of Patanjali Yoga aphorisms. Now, on this path, he simply surrenders himself to the will of Ishvara, as we saw, and merges all his desires with the divine will. So, what is Ishvara Paridhana and how it can lead to Samadhi is in detail explained in the sutras of chapter 2, sutra 32 and 45 of Patanjali Yoga aphorisms, which we can perhaps study some other time. So, in other words, the complete surrender to Ishvara is not an add on but a direct path into the unitive absorption as Patanjali describes. So, one way we saw is the devotion which happens through formless and with form. And Krishna mentioned that that jnani or that yogi or that person or devotee or aspirant who works on the path of knowledge, the fourth kind of devotee who has devotion on the formless is the highest path and the most effective path. In parallel, Lord Krishna also says devotion, the path of bhakti, is also equally strong and can be achieved. And it is slightly easier compared to the path of the formless devotion. And this itself, the path of bhakti, if worked properly as provided in the roadmap, you can, or the aspirant can, or the devotee can reach to the highest levels of samadhi uh, while working on the path of Raj Yoga in parallel to the to the path of bhakti. So, friends, we will pause here to take up some thoughts, questions.